Hello and welcome to today's 10-minute episode of The Listening Lounge. My name is Nick Day, CEO of JGA Recruitment Group, specialist payroll and HR recruiters.
We are exploring a subject that is a really hot topic, which is remote working, and why in particular it's the future. Because today I'm joined by Liam Martin, who is a serial entrepreneur who runs Time Doctor and Staff.com, and he's one of the most popular time tracking and productivity software platforms in use by top brands today. Listen, before we jump into what remote working is now, it's a hot topic because post-pandemic, everyone now has obviously had to work from home. They want to sustain that way of working, that way of life, and not everyone wants to go back. But the reality is the origins of working from home, right, or remote working, as it may be, depending on where you are, of course, based, is not a new concept, right? So I wonder if you could just give us a little bit more of the history into remote working, and you know, this is not a new concept, although it's new to many of us. So I wonder if you can just give us some of the origins.
Yeah, it's hilarious when I think about where we come from. I've been working remotely for almost 20 years, and there was a very solid, active community pre-pandemic. Running Remote, which we had mentioned before, is largest conference on remote work. In 2019, when we had our last event that was in person, we had 750 people. That was the biggest conference on remote work, but they were incredibly passionate, focused individuals that were really trying to figure out how to build and scale remote organizations, not just as a lifestyle business, but as like an actual business, like Coinbase and Shopify and WordPress and GitLab, which are all companies that do tens to hundreds of billions of dollars in valuation and are entirely remote. But around February, probably most of you know that, there were a couple of changes that happened in the world economy. 4% of the US workforce was remote in February of 2020. By March, that was 45% of the US workforce. That's the biggest shift in labor since the Industrial Revolution. But the Industrial Revolution took about 80 years to do, and we did that in March. So a complete change of how remote work or how work is being done. And right now, we're sitting at approximately 30% of the US workforce working remotely. And I think you can extend that for most of Western countries as well, where we're seeing that as effectively the bottom. 5% of workers right now state that they are working from home due to COVID in the United States. So we're effectively at basically COVID zero. So that 30% of the workforce that's currently working remotely is doing it by choice.
Yeah, no, that's kind of probably what we're seeing the same here in the UK as well. And I think the reality is a lot of people used to have businesses saying, you can't work from home because of X, Y, and Z reason. You must be in the office because X, Y, and Z can't be delivered. And actually what's happened is it's been forced upon them and performance hasn't dropped. In many examples, it's on the other way. People have saved money on commuting and other bits and pieces. And actually they found a new way of working. And all those old reasons that were there before to say you have to be in the office have kind of been made redundant overnight. I mean, such a transitional shift. But why do you think it needed a pandemic for that to happen? Why do you think the uptake was so slow initially? Was it about trust in that instance that I gave? Was it about micromanagement? Because we're not just seeing a change in the way that we're working. We're seeing a change in the leadership as well. There's been a massive shift in the way that we lead, being more output led now and less command and control. What's your
So I'll give it a better definition. To me, the word that I would choose is there was a fear of autonomy. Okay. So autonomy is actually and I choose my word specifically. When you think about trust, I actually still think there needs to be trust inside of remote work. I mean, I don't know about you, but I see an article almost every day, because I'm in this all the time, of remote employee works 3 jobs and makes $700,000 a year, right? Like there are those articles that are coming out there. Now, to be completely honest with you, if you're happy with someone's performance and they're doing the job, does it matter if they have 2 other jobs? It might from a legal perspective, but from an actual, from an epistemological perspective, I don't really care whether or not you do 10 jobs or whether you just do my job, but I just want the work done. And autonomy is the core component that I think most of the remote pioneers were really focused on. And you need to be able to pull that autonomy inside of your organization, which effectively means the ability for people to be able to, you direct people to say, we need to go from A to B, but you choose how to go from A to B. That is up to you as the individual employee. It is not up to me as the employer. So that removes a lot of the micromanagement components that you wouldn't have otherwise gotten. Obviously, there's a bit of a feedback loop issue where There are some times where maybe someone's going in the wrong direction for a week when they're working from home, and maybe you would have caught it in a day if they were working in an office. But those examples are few and far between, to be completely honest with you.
Because this is all output-led stuff, right? So the idea being, if you have a different structure, you give them, you have that autonomy, providing the outputs are met, then you're happy with them doing their job. Have there been any statistics released on how productivity may have gone up in that scenario, or how we can help managers to trust more in that kind of scenario?
So I can definitely tell you that autonomy is probably one of the biggest employee perks for extending retention inside of organizations. There is a lot of research that has been done on that. There hasn't been much research done on the points that you were talking about before. And the issue is just because it's so new. So yes, I'm sure the studies are currently being done. It's a very exciting time, to be honest with you, in remote work. I mean, when I think about February of 2020, we were thinking, oh man, maybe we'd get to 6 to 7% of the US workforce working remotely. 45% the next month. It completely blew us away. And obviously the pandemic was horrible, but I actually think this is a fantastic silver lining, which is the genie's out of the bottle and everyone was able to try remote work. They were able to try it on. I spoke to a founder of a company that you would know, worth $100+ billion. And he said, Liam, we always wanted to go remote, but the pandemic stopped us. The board stopped us. So they wouldn't allow us to actually make this decision. But the pandemic forced us into that situation. So now the people that were kind of almost friendly to remote work pre-pandemic are staying remote completely. The people that were kind of on the fence are going with the hybrid solution. And then the people that hated remote work before the pandemic, a lot of those people are trying to drag their people back into the office, but it's actually creating a lot of big problems inside of their organizations.
Being such an advocate for remote working, do you have a view on, because you mentioned hybrid working then, and I would say certainly in the UK, in the employment space that we work in, and we recruit actually across Europe and into the US as well, we're still seeing hybrid now as being the most popular option that employers are taking, and actually what most candidates tend to want as well. There's like a little bit of office. Maybe it's because they're still getting used to that new environment, but the overriding results that we're seeing as a recruiter is that hybrid is the preferred option. Do you have a preferred option in terms of the way things are working? Are you an advocate of 100% remote working, or do you think actually hybrid is the best balance, or does it depend?
Yeah, I mean, I would say hybrid is the least successful option. It's the option that has the biggest opportunity to fail, to be completely honest with you. And I know that that's an unpopular opinion because the majority of the market is going hybrid. Yeah. But I actually, in a lot of cases for hybrid companies, I would suggest that they go back to the office completely. And it's for a couple factors, but the biggest one is something that we define as distance bias. So this has been a term that's been used in the HR industry for a while, but we've specifically grabbed it for remote work, which is effectively distance bias or proximity bias, is that the closer you are to the decision maker or to your manager, the more your ideas get adopted inside of the organization. So let's say you have a board meeting with 5 in-person employees and 3 people on Zoom. You have the meeting, you say, hey, we're going to do A. Those 3 people pop off of Zoom. And then I say, hey, Nick, listen, Liam's an idiot. I know that we just said that we were going to do A, but let's do B, right? Nick, you know that this is the way that we should be doing things. And what it creates is an undocumented conversation. And this is a really negative aspect of generally all kind of like hybrid in-office environments, is there's a lot of undocumented conversations. So then the next morning, we wake up, and that worker that thought we were going to do A is now recognizing, oh, we're doing B. I thought we were going to adopt my idea. They either have to move into the office that they don't want to do to be closer to that decision maker, or they quit and they go find another job that's fully remote.
I have to say, it is a really interesting example that you've just given. I mean, there must be people listening to this going, yeah, that's kind of, I've experienced that in some way. You brought that home quite nicely.
And it is a tidal wave of frustrations that's popping up. We're already seeing it now, at least in the research that we're doing and that I'm reading. And this is only going to become a bigger and bigger problem, where a lot of workers are going to become disenfranchised. They'll effectively become second-class workers inside of these organizations. The way to solve for it is what I call asynchronous management. So the ability to be able to manage people without directly interacting with each other and giving everyone the same exact access to the decision maker that you would had if they were remote or if they're in an office. But it's very, very difficult for a manager to be able to do that.
I think one of the things I've just to mention as a story, really, as a recruiter, that I've seen really interesting. I've seen, we're seeing obviously the Great Resignation or the Great Awakening, when we want to look at it, and it's generally happening over here in the UK in particular. We're seeing lots of movement. We're seeing people move jobs because their employers don't offer them remote work and they want to stay remote, right? So they leave and they go, well, I'm going to vote with my feet. I'm going to find a company that does. And you mentioned at the start of this episode, what I'm finding really interesting is the employers they are leaving, they'll often come to us and say, Nick, we need support recruiting and we need this individual. And I'll say, but you don't support remote working. We do now. And it's like, if you'd offered this just a little bit earlier, you wouldn't have lost the individual in the first place. It would need you to come to me to try and replace it. What companies are doing is they're reacting, I think, a little bit too slow to the phenomenon, because they're losing talent they don't have to lose if they make the shift earlier. But they're realizing they have to make the shift in order to get the talent back in at the same level that they're losing it, or that talent won't come to them. It's a really interesting thing for me to see from a bird's eye view, because I'm looking at it going, if you had made that shift a few months earlier, those individuals that left your business never would have left in the first place, because we know their motivations for moving. It's just a really interesting thing to see. I think people are making the transition, but they're making it reactive when talent's already left the door, and they could be a little bit more proactive, I think.
Remote work is table stakes. It is table stakes now. You can't not offer remote work if you want to be able to be a successful 21st century company. And that's just, if I could just leave people with that, it's really important to be able to implement some type of policy, because if you don't have it, you are going to get caught. I mean, it just, even for us, as a separate aside, which is one other story that I'll add to this, we have personally been hammered by a lot of the very large tech companies. So we've had companies like Facebook and Google and a lot of other tech companies that have come to our labor force. And I think they actually almost have us like bookmarked, where they're thinking, all right, well, these guys have been working remotely for 12 years. They're an amazing company. They've got fantastic people in them, but we never would have hired them pre-pandemic because we didn't work remotely. And now because people are working remotely, we are losing people to all of these large tech companies. So you also have to take into consideration that not only are these people quitting because they're frustrated about remote work, but it's never easier to get a remote job than today. So the transition process is so fast and easy. You need to protect yourself against these things. Implement remote work or die.
Yeah, no, I think that's the best way to leave the show. Just needs to say one more time, thank you, Liam Marston, for joining me today. I look forward to bringing you the next episode real soon. Thank you, Liam.